6:11 a.m., Minneapolis, Minnesota. The first burst of gunfire tore through the frozen pre-dawn silence. At precisely 6:11 a.m., floodlights blazed to life around North River Community Academy, a public charter school buried beneath snow and shrouded in secrecy. FBI, ICE, and DEA vehicles surrounded the campus as federal agents advanced only to encounter immediate resistance. A lookout fled through a side entrance. Moments later, gunshots erupted from behind the gymnasium. Flashbangs detonated. Windows shattered inward. Agents pushed through billowing smoke while alarms wailed across deserted hallways decorated with children's artwork that no child had seen in months. The school's official enrollment, 1,240 students. Inside, they found zero. A barricaded office was breached amid chaos. 2 suspects were taken down. Hard drives smoldered in a trash bin. Beneath the cafeteria floor tiles, investigators discovered a concealed tunnel entrance. As the smoke dissipated, a different kind of weapon emerged: documentation. Filing cabinets stuffed with immaculate rosters. Flawless attendance records. Every regulatory box meticulously checked. Everything appeared too perfect. Analysts processed the data and uncovered the deception. 312 students shared identical birth dates. 184 addresses repeated across 5 counties. Social security numbers belonged to deceased adults. The school reported 98% subsidized enrollment yet had no food service invoices and compensated teachers for classes that never convened. The fabricated records crumbled under scrutiny. What remained was the control room behind it all. The principal's office door came down during a controlled breach. Initially, the space appeared ceremonial: flags, plaques, framed photographs with municipal officials. But behind a false partition, agents discovered the actual command center. A floor safe revealed $41 million in bundled cash marked with chemical tracers. Beside it sat encrypted drives labeled by color rather than dates: red, blue, and black. The red files documented homicides, at least 12 killings connected to interference events. Victims included local inspectors, a procurement officer, and a zoning clerk. Each entry listed a payment amount, execution method, and disposal timeline. One notation read simply: obstacle removed. Process restored. The blue files detailed systematic coercion and torture. Officials who refused bribes were kidnapped, brutalized, and recorded until they complied. Bank approvals followed within days. Licenses were renewed. Audits were canceled. The black files contained the most disturbing evidence. They cataloged children by age, blood type, and harvest readiness. Medical invoices referenced kidney and liver extractions routed through fraudulent clinic networks. Dates corresponded with missing persons reports. For older students, girls aged 13 to 17, there were itineraries, transportation routes, and client lists. Payments increased based on age. Silence was maintained through family threats. A master ledger summarized the operation: organ trafficking, sexual exploitation, narcotics transit fees, all laundered through school subsidies. One line item totaled $2.3 billion across 26 months. Mounted above the desk hung a framed motto: order through paperwork. In that office, agents grasped the full reality. The school wasn't merely a cover, it was the operational core. Each crime financed the next. What appeared to be an educational institution collapsed into something far more expansive. 8:19 a.m. Analysts traced the network across 5 states, 27 shell corporations and 89 licensing approvals expedited without proper inspection. At the center stood Safia Noor Abi, a Somali-born administrator serving as principal of North River Community Academy. Over 36 months, $4.6 billion moved through the system without triggering a single enforcement response. That didn't occur by accident. It happened because officials approved documents, audits were postponed, and warning signs were erased. One department authorized $620 million in grants without conducting a single classroom visit. Another removed a high-risk designation following one phone call. Safia presented herself publicly as a Somali community advocate and education reformer. Behind closed doors, she didn't operate alone. Licensing directors, grant officers, and regulatory personnel provided institutional protection. Extensions were approved within days, inspections were waived, and files were manually cleared. When one official delayed a renewal, he was reassigned. When a contractor raised questions, his security clearance disappeared. North River didn't hide, it assimilated, protected by documentation and political authorization. Transactions remained modest. Payment routes fragmented. Records were redirected. The school remained operational. The children vanished. By 8:19 a.m., command staff reached a unified conclusion: this wasn't simply a criminal enterprise. It was an institutional ecosystem operated from a principal's office and shielded by officials who understood exactly what they were enabling. 11:47 p.m., Minneapolis. The city received no advance notice. Within 180 seconds, a multi-billion-dollar criminal operation would be struck from multiple angles simultaneously. FBI, IC, and DEA units launched Operation Cold Iron, a synchronized multi-site assault targeting 14 locations across 3 counties, all connected to Safia Nourabi's network. 11:49 p.m. Alpha Team approached a camouflaged dormitory facility in North Minneapolis. A controlled breaching charge opened the reinforced steel entrance with prec. The narrow corridor became a tactical zone for 43 seconds before the threat was neutralized. 11:53 p.m. ICE's Bravo team breached a refrigerated medical warehouse officially licensed, secretly functioning as a transit hub for harvested organs. 2 suspects barricaded themselves with semi-automatic handguns. A stun grenade detonated, disorienting the room. Negative pressure ventilation trapped smoke midair. The exchange concluded swiftly. No federal casualties. 12:01 a.m. DEA units assaulted an abandoned industrial complex on the city's west side. Thermal drones detected abnormal heat signatures venting through rooftop exhausts. As the sliding gate opened, crossfire erupted from the second level. Agents advanced behind tactical ballistic shields, clearing ground incrementally. Helmet-mounted cameras recorded 17 minutes of sustained firefight before full control was established. 12:18 a.m. Financial alarms triggered across the network. Accounts began shifting. More than $96 million attempted to flee through contingency channels. Cyber teams intercepted and froze the flow within 8 minutes, collapsing the laundering tunnels mid-transfer. 12:31 a.m. A concealed tunnel was discovered beneath reinforced concrete, leading to a detention wing. Medics entered first. The air reeked of chemicals. Compressors hummed. Conveyor belts were still moving. Weapons seized on-site included assault rifles, handguns, personal body armor, encrypted communications gear, and stockpiled ammunition. The recovery. The first door to the holding wing opened at 1:14 a.m. No gunfire followed, only silence. Medics moved ahead of the tactical stack, boots slowing as their lights swept across a concrete room never meant for daylight. Along the walls sat dozens of figures, knees drawn tight, eyes fixed on the floor. They did not run. They did not speak. Many had learned that movement brought punishment. A rapid headcount confirmed 273 children and 246 teenage girls recovered alive. 17 were U.S. citizens. The rest came from 5 countries, trafficked across borders with falsified school records that listed them as transfers. Several had been reported missing 6 to 18 months earlier. Their files were closed. Their names were gone. Medical triage exposed the pattern: chemical burns on fingertips, fingerprints intentionally destroyed. Sedation scars on the neck and forearms. For younger children, blood type tags had been stitched into clothing seams. One medic quietly removed a tag marked O negative, the kind hospitals prize most. The implication required no explanation. In a secondary room, agents found ledgers stacked like textbooks. Each page reduced a life to metrics: age, weight, compatibility, destination. Surgical dates aligned with shipping manifests. Payments were logged to shell clinics and then rerouted offshore. For the girls aged 13 to 17, another ledger existed. It listed travel windows, client tiers, and enforcement notes. Resistance was punished. silence was purchased with threats to families. At 1:36 a.m., 2 girls collapsed during extraction, dehydration, malnutrition. One pulse barely reached 42 beats per minute. Medics stabilized them on the floor while the evidence team sealed the room. The conveyor belts nearby were still warm, motors ticking down as if nothing had changed. By 2:02 a.m., buses arrived under blackout conditions. Blankets replaced restraints. Names were asked. Many could not answer. Agents wrote numbers on wristbands and promised that this time the numbers would lead back to identities, not erasure. Outside, snow began to fall again. Inside the command channel, the tone shifted. This was no longer about seizures or arrests. It was about undoing damage measured in years, not minutes. The network had turned children into inventory. That night, the inventory walked out alive. The financial architecture. By 2:27 a.m., the firefights were over. What remained was the quieter violence, the numbers. In the command center, analysts projected a living map of transactions that pulsed like a heartbeat. Each node represented an account. Each line, a permission granted, a question not asked. Together, they formed the engine that kept Safia Noor Abdi's network alive. Over 36 months, more than $4.6 billion had moved through 67 accounts spanning 5 countries. None stayed long. Funds landed, fractured, recombined, and slipped onward in increments calibrated to stay below federal reporting thresholds. The source was always the same: education subsidies, meal programs, special needs grants. The destinations were not. Shell nonprofits paid Shell vendors. Shell vendors invoiced Shell clinics. The clinics wired consulting fees to offshore entities that never hired staff, never paid rent, never delivered services. In one quarter alone, $312 million passed through a single account that listed 0 employees and no physical address. Another account recorded $74 million in deposits in a month with no corresponding expenses, no food contracts, no maintenance, no payroll. The money didn't support students. It fed the machine. Bribes were logged with the same precision as tuition, a licensing renewal expedited, an audit postponed, a zoning variance approved overnight. The amounts varied: $25,000, $80,000, $250,000, but the outcomes were consistent. Emails recovered from encrypted servers were blunt: forms approved. No follow-up. When a question did surface, a different ledger activated: coercion budgets, surveillance notes, pressure events. Compliance followed. The laundering architecture was designed to look boring. Repetition replaced scrutiny. Automated approvals replaced oversight. In a system optimized for speed, sameness became proof of legitimacy. Analysts watched as algorithms mistook volume for virtue and frequency for trust. The network did not hide, it blended. At 2:54 a.m., cyber teams collapsed the tunnels. One by one, accounts froze. Intermediaries failed to reconcile balances. Transfers bounced. The map flickered as entire branches went dark. In less than 10 minutes, the flow ceased midstream, mid-transaction, stranding funds like ships without ports. The impact rippled outward. Legitimate childcare providers, those that had closed because they couldn't compete with a fraud ring that didn't buy food or pay staff, now had proof. Capacity reports showed entire neighborhoods where licensed childcare had fallen by 22%. Families had lost options while billions were siphoned away. At 3:11 a.m., a final summary populated the screen: losses confirmed, funds frozen, referrals issued. Investigators estimated 68,000 low-income children had been denied services over 3 years because resources were diverted upstream. The damage wasn't abstract. It had addresses. It had birthdays. A supervisor muted the room and spoke plainly: this wasn't a failure of compassion. It was a failure of verification. The system had rewarded paperwork and punished questions. Safia Noor Abdi understood that better than anyone. She didn't break the rules. She weaponized them. As dawn approached, the machine lay exposed, silent, stalled, and finally visible. The money was no longer moving. but the reckoning had only begun. The fugitive. At 4:08 a.m., as the last financial nodes went dark, a different screen lit up inside the command center: traffic cameras, port logs, license plate readers. One name remained unaccounted for: Safia Noor Abi. She had left Minneapolis 6 hours before the raids, moving with the same discipline that defined her network. No panic withdrawals, no frantic calls. Her phone had gone silent days earlier, replaced by a single encrypted device that pulsed briefly near the riverfront before disappearing. A private dock logged a departure just after 1 a.m., paperwork filed under a shell logistics firm tied to education consulting. Investigators reconstructed her path the way they reconstructed her crimes, patiently, methodically. Safia had not run in fear. She had executed a contingency. Her emails, drafted weeks earlier, had queued approvals to auto-renew. Payroll systems were scheduled to file. Grant applications were set to resubmit. Even in absence, the machine tried to breathe. A profile assembled on the wall told the story she sold and the one she lived. Publicly, Safia Noor Abdi was a reformer: panels, photos, awards. Privately, she was a manager of thresholds: how far to push, how little to spend, how much pain could be hidden behind paperwork. She understood institutions because she had studied them. She understood compassion because she exploited it. By 4:36 a.m., arrest warrants expanded: human trafficking, organ trafficking, narcotics, conspiracy, money laundering, bribery, obstruction, homicide. Federal holds were issued across multiple jurisdictions. Interpol notices were drafted. The net widened beyond the city, beyond the country. But absence has gravity. It pulls questions toward it. How many audits had been waived because the forms were complete? How many approvals had been automated because the numbers looked familiar? How many warnings had been softened to avoid offense? Safia's greatest protection had never been secrecy. It had been normalcy. At 5:02 a.m., recovery teams completed transfers. Children and girls were moved to secured facilities under new identities. Counselors replaced guards. For the first time in months, years for some, the night ended without locks. Names began to return, not all at once. Carefully. Respectfully. Outside, dawn crept over Minneapolis. Snow reflected the light in clean, unforgiving sheets. The school stood quiet again, its banners still fluttering, symbols emptied of meaning. Evidence tags covered the walls. The place that had pretended to teach now testified. A senior agent addressed the room without ceremony. She used a school because it's where trust lives. She used the system because it prefers speed to doubt. And she lasted because too many people mistook silence for peace. Safia Noor Abdi remained at large. But the network did not. Its accounts were frozen. Its corridors were sealed. Its victims were no longer inventory. The chapter closed without applause. There was no victory speech, only a ledger rewritten and a question left hanging, quiet, insistent, unavoidable. If one school could hide this much harm in plain sight, how many others are still perfectly filled out and perfectly empty inside? The aftermath. By 6:18 a.m., the operation had ended. But the city was just beginning to react. News alerts spread faster than the snow that continued to fall. Parents gathered outside school districts with the same question on their faces: how could this happen here? Community leaders issued statements calling for calm, transparency, and answers. Some demanded accountability. Others urged restraint, warning against collective blame. The mood was fractured but focused, a rare convergence of shock and insistence that this time the truth would not be buried under procedure. Public trust had taken a measurable hit. Emergency hotlines logged hundreds of calls within hours, families asking whether records were real, whether transfers had been verified, whether oversight existed at all. Faith organizations opened their doors for briefings. School boards scheduled emergency sessions before noon. The message from residents was consistent: sympathy for victims, support for recovery, and zero tolerance for silence. Politics moved quickly and unevenly. Within hours, city officials announced internal reviews. State agencies pledged cooperation. Federal leaders emphasized the scope of the charges and the protections now in place for survivors. Yet the most consequential reactions were quieter. Resignations followed: licensing managers, grant supervisors, compliance officers whose signatures appeared too often and asked too few questions. Legislative staff began drafting amendments before the sun fully rose. Legal consequences. The legal consequences were immediate and expansive. Prosecutors unsealed indictments spanning human trafficking, financial fraud, racketeering, bribery, obstruction, and homicide-related conspiracies. Asset forfeiture actions froze properties, vehicles, accounts, and shell entities tied to the network. Court orders placed emergency trustees over affected institutions to preserve records and ensure continuity of legitimate services. For the first time in years, audits were not postponed. They were mandated, simultaneous, and independent. Systemic reform. Reform followed the evidence. Subsidy programs were suspended pending verification, then relaunched with safeguards that favored proof over pace. Enrollment systems were rebuilt to flag biometric duplication and cross-county anomalies. Licensing approvals lost their automatic pathways. Site visits became prerequisites, not formalities. Grant disbursements were split into tranches tied to real-world indicators: staffing, food procurement, attendance validated by third parties. The system slowed intentionally. Speed had been the vulnerability. Oversight changed hands as well as habits. Multi-agency review panels replaced single-office approvals. Whistleblower protections expanded with mandatory response timelines and penalties for retaliation. Data sharing agreements, once resisted as inconvenient, became standard where discretion had been absolute. Documentation became accountable. The political debate sharpened but narrowed. The question was no longer whether reform was necessary, but how deep it should go. Some argued the changes risked burdening legitimate providers. Others countered that legitimacy had been weaponized by those who knew the forms by heart. The compromise was verification with teeth, checks that measured outcomes, not intentions. As evening approached, recovery teams reported progress. Survivors were placed under protective care. Identity restoration began. Funds earmarked for restitution were segregated by court order. The city did not celebrate. It recalibrated. The final assessment was sobering and precise. This was not a failure of compassion nor of funding. It was a failure of verification, multiplied by convenience. The response then was equally precise: rebuild trust by proving it. Record by record. Visit by visit. Signature by signature. The system would not return to how it was. It would return slower, stricter, and visible. And for the first time in a long while, visibility was not a liability. It was the point. Closing reflection. This story is not told to glorify force, conflict, or confrontation. It is told to show what happens when attention drifts, when systems become routines, and when trust is granted without verification. No action described here should be seen as an example to follow, only as a reminder of the consequences that emerge when oversight fades. At its core, this is a story about responsibility, about institutions designed to protect, support, and educate, and how easily those purposes can be compromised when processes replace judgment. The harm did not begin with violence. It began quietly, with unchecked forms, automatic approvals, and assumptions left unchallenged. The most important outcomes were not arrests or seizures, but awareness and reform. Strong systems are not built on speed or silence. They are built on transparency, accountability, and the willingness to ask difficult questions before damage occurs. Real prevention happens long before headlines, through careful review and shared responsibility. This account does not ask for anger, fear, or division. It asks for attention, for patience, for a collective commitment to protect the most vulnerable by strengthening the systems meant to serve them. Stories like this matter not because of what they reveal about crime, but because of what they teach about vigilance. Progress begins not with force, but with care and the discipline to ensure that trust is always earned.